Ironic, isn't it? The person who feels everything often appears broken first, while the person who avoids feelings seems perfectly fine. Yet, months later, the story can begin to reverse. What looks like strength may be emotional escape. What looks like suffering may actually become healing. This is one of the least understood dynamics in modern relationships, and it becomes even more fascinating when an empath and an avoidant both decide to do the same thing at the same time. They stop reaching out. They stop checking in. They stop trying to fix what has been broken. Then the silence begins. It is a silence that is heavy with unspoken words, a quiet that is filled with the echoes of what was once said and what was never said at all. Most people assume they already know what happens next. They believe that the empath spends every day thinking about the relationship, replaying memories and dissecting conversations, while the avoidant quickly moves on without looking back, relieved to be free of the emotional demands that once felt so overwhelming. The truth is far more complex. Human psychology rarely follows the simple stories people tell themselves. Beneath the surface, two very different emotional worlds begin moving in opposite directions, like ships passing in the night, each unaware of the other's journey. One person may feel the pain immediately, a sharp and relentless ache that colors every moment of their day. The other may not feel the true impact until much later, when the silence has stretched long enough to reveal what was always there. One may struggle at the beginning, but slowly gain clarity, finding strength in the very pain that once seemed unbearable. The other may enjoy relief at first, only to face emotions that were delayed, buried, and ignored, emotions that rise to the surface when they are least expected. This is where no contact stops being a relationship strategy and starts becoming a psychological journey, a journey that transforms both people in ways they never anticipated. In this video, we will uncover what really happens inside the mind of an empath after communication ends, exploring the hidden landscape of their inner world. We will explore why silence can feel unbearable at first, and why many empaths eventually discover a level of emotional freedom they never expected, a freedom that emerges from the very depths of their pain. We will also examine what goes on inside the avoidant mind during the same period, including hidden emotional patterns that many people never notice, patterns that reveal the true complexity of avoidance. You will learn why emotional distance does not always mean emotional detachment, why avoidance can create delayed reactions, and why some avoidants suddenly become reflective long after the relationship appears to be over, long after they have convinced themselves they have moved on. We will break down the stages both personalities often experience, the emotional shifts that happen behind closed doors, and the surprising reversal that can occur when enough time passes, a reversal that challenges everything we thought we knew about who suffers more and who heals faster. Along the way, we will reveal lesser-known psychological truths about attachment, loss, memory, emotional regulation, and personal growth. Truths that explain why silence is so much more than the absence of words. Some of these insights challenge popular beliefs and may completely change the way you view silence, separation, and healing, offering a perspective that is both uncomfortable and liberating. Most importantly, stay with us until the end, because the final lesson is not about who misses whom more, who returns first, or who wins the silent battle, but about something far more profound. It is about a deeper truth that affects both the empath and the avoidant, a truth that explains why no contact can transform people in ways neither side expects, transforming them into versions of themselves they never knew existed. By the end of this video, you will understand why the same silence can produce two completely different experiences, and why that silence often reveals more than words ever could, peeling back the layers of pretense to expose the raw truth beneath. If topics like psychology, emotional intelligence, human behavior, and relationship dynamics interest you, then you are in the right place. Welcome to the channel. Be sure to subscribe and join us for more insights into the hidden patterns that shape human relationships and personal growth. For an empath, the first days of no contact often feel like walking into a room where all the sound has suddenly disappeared, where the familiar hum of connection has been replaced by an unsettling quiet that seems to press in from all sides. The silence feels unnatural, a violation of the natural order of things. The absence feels loud, almost deafening in its intensity. Their mind immediately notices that something has changed, that a fundamental shift has occurred in the fabric of their daily existence. A message that normally arrives does not appear, leaving a void where connection once lived. A conversation that was once part of daily life suddenly stops, cutting off a lifeline that provided comfort and meaning. Even when they know no contact is necessary, even when they understand that silence is the healthiest choice, the emotional impact can arrive almost instantly, crashing over them like a wave they did not see coming. This happens because empaths tend to process emotions in real time, feeling the full weight of loss as soon as it occurs. They do not simply notice a loss. They feel it deeply and completely. They experience it in their bodies, in their minds, in their hearts. Their thoughts begin moving in circles, searching for understanding, desperately seeking a way to make sense of what has happened. They replay old conversations, examining every word for hidden meaning. They revisit arguments, wondering if they could have handled things differently. They examine small details that once seemed unimportant, looking for clues they might have missed. They wonder whether they said the wrong thing, whether a different choice of words could have changed everything. They wonder whether they could have explained themselves better, whether more patience would have made a difference. They wonder whether one more conversation might have changed the outcome, whether one final attempt could have saved what was slipping away. The mind starts searching for answers because unanswered questions create discomfort, a gnawing unease that refuses to be ignored. The empath wants clarity, a clear understanding of what went wrong and why. They want understanding, a deeper comprehension of the forces that shaped the relationship. They want emotional resolution, a sense of closure that allows them to move forward. Yet no contact provides none of those things. Instead, it creates a space where uncertainty is allowed to exist, where questions remain unanswered and feelings remain unresolved. For someone who values emotional connection, that uncertainty can feel incredibly difficult, almost unbearable at times. At the same time, the avoidant often experiences something completely different, a reaction that seems to come from another world entirely. While the empath is trying to make sense of the silence, the avoidant may initially feel relief, a welcome release from the pressures that once seemed so overwhelming. The emotional tension that existed within the relationship suddenly seems to disappear, as if a heavy weight has been lifted from their shoulders. Expectations feel distant, no longer pressing down on them with their constant demands. Difficult conversations are no longer waiting around the corner, no longer looming like dark clouds on the horizon. Emotional pressure appears to fade, allowing them to breathe freely for the first time in months. There is more room to breathe, more space to think without the constant interference of another person's needs. There is more room to focus on personal routines, to return to the familiar rhythms of daily life. There is more room to avoid subjects that previously felt uncomfortable, to sidestep the emotional challenges that once seemed unavoidable. This is one reason why many people mistakenly assume avoidants do not care, why they see the outward calm and interpret it as emotional indifference. They look at the composed exterior and conclude that the avoidant has already moved on, that the relationship meant nothing to them. But relief and indifference are not the same thing. The relief comes from escaping emotional pressure, from finally being free of the demands that once felt so suffocating, not necessarily from losing emotional attachment. In many cases, the avoidant is not celebrating the loss of the connection, but responding to the temporary reduction of emotional intensity, enjoying the peace that comes with distance. This creates a fascinating contrast that reveals the fundamental difference between these two personalities. The empath feels the emotional absence immediately, acutely aware of the void that is opened in their life. The avoidant feels the emotional pressure disappear immediately, grateful for the respite from the demands of intimacy. Both reactions are real. Both reactions are valid, yet they look completely different from the outside. One person appears heartbroken, consumed by sadness and longing. The other appears unaffected, focused on the practicalities of daily life. One person is consumed by emotions, their thoughts dominated by memories and regrets. The other appears focused on daily life, moving through their routines with seeming ease. This difference often creates confusion because people tend to judge emotional experiences by visible behavior, assuming that what they see is all there is. They assume the person who shows pain is suffering more, that their visible distress is a reliable measure of their inner state. They assume the person who looks calm is suffering less, that their composure reflects an absence of feeling. Human psychology is rarely that simple, rarely that straightforward, rarely that easy to read from the outside. As the days continue, the empath's internal struggle often becomes even more intense, deepening with each passing hour. There is a strong desire to repair what feels broken, an urgent need to restore the connection that has been severed. The urge to reach out becomes difficult to ignore, a constant presence that demands attention. Every memory seems connected to a possible solution, every happy moment a reminder of what could be saved. Every conversation feels like evidence that needs to be reviewed, every word a potential clue to the mystery of what went wrong. The empath begins searching for meaning everywhere, finding significance in the smallest details. A kind message from months ago suddenly feels important, a sign that the connection was real. A misunderstanding that once seemed small now feels significant, a turning point that could have been handled differently. The mind keeps returning to the same emotional territory, hoping to discover a new answer that will unlock the puzzle, hoping that one more round of analysis will finally bring clarity. This happens because empaths often believe that understanding leads to healing, that if they can just understand the problem, they can solve it. If they can solve it, they can restore peace. If they can restore peace, they can reconnect. But this is where many empaths face one of the hardest lessons of their lives, a lesson that cuts to the very core of their identity. They slowly begin realizing that not every emotional burden belongs to them, that they have been carrying weights that were never theirs to carry. Throughout many relationships, empaths develop a habit of carrying responsibilities that were never theirs to carry, taking on burdens that should have been shared. They feel responsible for other people's happiness, as if their own well-being depends on the joy of those around them. They feel responsible for other people's comfort, as if it is their job to ensure that everyone is at ease. They feel responsible for maintaining emotional harmony, even when they are exhausted, even when they have nothing left to give. Over time, this habit becomes so normal that it feels like love itself, like the very essence of what it means to care for someone. They begin believing that caring for someone means managing their emotions, that love requires constant attention to the feelings of the other person. They begin believing that understanding someone means fixing their struggles, that compassion means solving their problems. They begin believing that compassion requires self-sacrifice, that giving of themselves is the only way to truly love. No contact interrupts this pattern, shattering the assumptions that have guided their lives. Suddenly, there is nobody to rescue, nobody to reassure, nobody to emotionally manage. The empath is left alone with their own thoughts, with their own feelings, with their own needs. At first, this can feel unbearable, a void that seems impossible to fill. The energy that was once directed toward another person has nowhere to go, no outlet for the constant outflow of care. The instinct to help remains active, a familiar impulse that craves expression, but there is no immediate outlet, no one to receive what they have always given. This often creates emotional restlessness, a sense of agitation that refuses to settle. The empath wants action, wants movement, wants progress. Yet no contact demands patience, demands stillness, demands waiting. During this period, many empaths discover something unexpected, something they never anticipated. Beneath their desire to help others exists a neglected relationship with themselves, a connection that has been starved of attention for years. For years, they may have been focused on understanding everyone else, on decoding the emotions and needs of others. Now, they are forced to understand themselves, to turn their attention inward for the first time in memory. They begin noticing how much emotional energy they invested, how much of themselves they gave away. They begin recognizing patterns that once felt invisible, patterns that shaped their choices and their suffering. They start asking different questions, questions that shift their focus from others to themselves. Instead of asking why someone else behaved a certain way, they begin asking why they tolerated certain behaviors, why they accepted treatment that was less than they deserved. Instead of asking how they can save the connection, they begin asking why they felt responsible for saving it in the first place, why they believed that love required endless sacrifice. While this transformation is slowly unfolding within the empath, the avoidant is often moving through a completely different process, a journey that is invisible to the outside world. On the surface, life may appear normal, a continuation of the routines that have always defined their existence. Work continues, demanding attention and focus. Daily routines continue, providing structure and predictability. Hobbies provide distraction, filling the hours with activity and engagement. Social activities create stimulation, offering moments of connection and enjoyment. New goals offer direction, giving purpose to their efforts. The avoidant often focuses on movement because movement creates distance from uncomfortable emotions, because staying busy prevents the mind from wandering into dangerous territory. Staying busy feels productive, a way to demonstrate that they are moving forward. Staying occupied feels safe, a buffer against the vulnerability of stillness. The mind remains focused on what is immediately in front of it, rather than what is happening internally, avoiding the deeper truths that lurk beneath the surface. This coping style can be effective in the short term, providing a way to manage the immediate discomfort of separation. It allows the avoidant to maintain stability, to keep their life from falling apart. It reduces emotional overwhelm, preventing feelings from becoming too intense to handle. It prevents painful feelings from dominating daily life, allowing them to function despite the loss. But there is an important difference between not feeling something and not processing something, a difference that determines the course of their healing. Avoidants are often skilled at suppressing emotional experiences, pushing feelings down until they are no longer consciously accessible. Suppression creates distance from feelings, allowing the avoidant to move through life without being weighed down by emotion. But it does not eliminate them. The emotions remain present beneath awareness, stored in the body and the subconscious. They become stored rather than resolved, accumulating like debt that will eventually have to be paid. This hidden reality is rarely discussed, rarely acknowledged in conversations about relationships and loss. Many people assume emotions disappear when they are ignored, that if you just stop thinking about something, it will eventually go away. In truth, ignored emotions often remain active in subtle ways, influencing thoughts and behaviors without conscious awareness. They influence thoughts, shaping the way we see ourselves and others. They shape decisions, guiding choices in ways we do not fully understand. They affect mood, creating undercurrents of dissatisfaction that we cannot explain. They remain part of the psychological landscape, even when they are not consciously acknowledged, a silent presence that colors everything. The avoidant may not spend hours thinking about the relationship, replaying memories or analyzing conversations. They may not openly discuss their feelings, sharing their inner world with others. They may not appear emotional, their composure intact. Yet, the connection often continues existing beneath the surface, a current that flows unseen. As weeks pass, distractions begin losing some of their power, their ability to fill the void gradually diminishing. The excitement of staying busy becomes familiar, losing its novelty and its appeal. New routines become ordinary, no longer providing the same sense of purpose. The emotional distance that once felt liberating no longer creates the same sense of relief, no longer feels like the freedom it once did. This is often when deeper emotions start becoming harder to ignore, when the walls begin to crack. Certain memories return unexpectedly, surfacing at the most inconvenient moments. Familiar places trigger reflection, reminding them of what once was. Quiet moments become more noticeable, spaces where the silence can no longer be filled with activity. Curiosity begins appearing where certainty once existed, a desire to know what happened, to understand what they might have lost. Meanwhile, the empath is experiencing changes of their own, a transformation that is both painful and liberating. The emotional intensity that once felt overwhelming starts becoming more manageable, the sharp edges of grief beginning to soften. The constant need for answers begins softening, the urgency of understanding starting to fade. The mind slowly stops searching every memory for hidden meaning, releasing its grip on the past. The relationship is no longer the center of every thought, its hold on their attention gradually loosening. Small moments of peace begin appearing between periods of sadness, brief respites from the weight of grief. Those moments gradually become longer, the periods of peace extending and the periods of pain shrinking. One of the most important shifts occurs when self-blame starts losing its grip, when the empath begins to see themselves with compassion rather than judgment. During the early stages of no contact, many empaths automatically assume responsibility for everything that went wrong, believing that their failures caused the collapse. They replay mistakes repeatedly, focusing on every misstep and every misjudgment. They focus on their flaws, convinced that if they had been better, the relationship would have survived. They search for evidence that they could have done more, that they failed to give enough of themselves. But as emotional clarity increases, a broader perspective begins emerging, a view that encompasses the whole relationship rather than just their part in it. They start recognizing that relationships involve two people, that they were not the only one responsible for what happened. They begin seeing patterns they previously ignored, patterns that reveal the truth of the dynamic. They begin understanding that effort alone cannot sustain a connection if both people are not participating equally. that no amount of giving can compensate for a partner's unwillingness to receive. This growing clarity creates stronger boundaries, a more defined sense of what is acceptable and what is not. Behaviors that once seemed acceptable no longer feel acceptable, the awareness of their own value making tolerance impossible. Emotional sacrifices that once felt normal begin feeling unhealthy, the cost of giving becoming too high. The empath develops a deeper understanding of their own needs, recognizing what they require to thrive. Instead of constantly adapting to maintain peace, they begin valuing mutual respect, a balance that honors both people. Instead of measuring their worth by how much they give, they begin recognizing their inherent value, a worth that exists independent of what they provide. At the same time, the avoidant may find themselves revisiting memories they believed were behind them, memories that refuse to stay buried. The emotional distance that once felt comfortable begins creating unexpected questions, questions that demand answers. Certain conversations gain new meaning, their significance becoming clear in retrospect. Certain moments seem more significant than they did before, their importance finally recognized. The absence of the relationship becomes more noticeable, a void that cannot be filled with activity alone. Not because the avoidance suddenly changes overnight, but because emotional reality eventually demands attention, insisting on being acknowledged. This is where silence begins acting like a mirror, reflecting back truths that were hidden beneath the noise of daily life. The empath sees how much of themselves they gave away in pursuit of connection, the cost of their constant giving. The avoidant sees how much emotional distance cost them, the price of their constant withdrawal. Both individuals are confronted with truths that were difficult to see while the relationship was active, truths that were obscured by the constant motion of interaction. The empath begins understanding that compassion without boundaries leads to exhaustion, that endless giving is not sustainable. The avoidant begins recognizing that distance without vulnerability leads to isolation, that protection becomes a prison. Neither realization happens instantly. Growth rarely arrives through dramatic moments, through sudden epiphanies or dramatic transformations. It often arrives through repetition, through quiet reflection, through ordinary days that slowly reshape perspective, each day adding a layer of understanding. The empath becomes less focused on changing another person and more focused on understanding themselves, turning their attention inward. The avoidant becomes less focused on escaping emotions and more aware of emotions waiting beneath the surface, feelings that can no longer be ignored. The silence continues doing its work, revealing truths that constant communication often keeps hidden, exposing the realities that words can obscure. And with every passing day, both individuals move further away from who they were when no contact first began, transformed by the very silence that once seemed so unbearable. Then, a reversal begins that very few people expect, a turning of the tables that challenges everything we think we know. In the beginning, it looked obvious who was suffering more, who was bearing the greater burden. The empath was the one struggling with the silence, their pain visible and raw. The empath was the one replaying memories, questioning decisions, and feeling the weight of the separation every single day, unable to escape the grief. Meanwhile, the avoidant appeared calm, composed, and untroubled. Life seemed normal, continuing without interruption. They continued with their routines, their work, their hobbies, their goals. They stayed busy, filling their days with activity. To an outside observer, it looked as if one person was drowning while the other had already moved on, already found their footing. But emotional timelines are not always equal, not always aligned with what we can see. One of the most surprising realities of no contact is that the person who suffers first often heals first, that early pain can lead to early recovery. The empath's pain arrives immediately because empaths do not usually run from emotions, do not hide from the truth of their feelings. They feel them deeply and completely. They sit with them, allowing the grief to wash over them. They think about them, exploring their meaning and their source. As painful as that process can be, it also creates movement, forward momentum toward healing. The emotions are being processed, worked through, integrated. The grief is being acknowledged, honored, released. The loss is being experienced in real time, moment by moment, day by day. Every difficult day becomes part of the healing journey, a step toward wholeness. Slowly, almost without noticing, the empath begins changing, their transformation becoming visible. The mornings become easier, the weight of grief lifting slightly. The urge to check messages becomes weaker, the habit of checking losing its power. The memories stop controlling every thought, their hold on the mind relaxing. The relationship stops becoming the center of their emotional world, its importance gradually diminishing. This transformation rarely happens overnight, in a single moment of clarity. It happens through small moments, through the accumulation of tiny victories. One day they laugh without thinking about the past, their joy genuine and unforced. Another day they enjoy an activity without feeling guilty, their pleasure undiminished. Then another day passes where they realize they have not replayed the same conversation for hours, their mind finally at rest. The healing is gradual, a slow unfolding of growth, but it is real, a tangible change in their inner landscape. As emotional dependence begins fading, the grip of the past loosening, something important returns. Personal identity, the sense of self that was lost in the relationship. Many empaths lose parts of themselves inside relationships, surrendering pieces of their identity to the demands of connection. Their focus becomes centered around understanding, helping, supporting, and emotionally carrying another person, their own needs fading into the background. Over time, they forget how much energy they have invested into someone else's needs, how much of themselves they have given away. When no contact continues long enough, that energy slowly returns to its original source, flowing back to the empath. The empath starts reconnecting with forgotten interests, rediscovering the passions that once defined them. Old goals become exciting again, their ambition rekindled. Personal growth becomes a priority, their own development finally taking center stage. Dreams that were pushed aside begin receiving attention, their potential finally recognized. Their sense of self becomes stronger, more defined, more secure. For the first time in a long time, their emotional state is no longer controlled by another person's availability, mood, or decisions. This is where the shift becomes truly fascinating, where the story takes its most unexpected turn. As the empath becomes stronger, the avoidant may begin experiencing something entirely different, a delayed reckoning that catches them off guard. The emotions that were delayed begin surfacing, rising from the depths where they were buried. The relief that existed during the early stages of no contact starts fading, its comfort no longer available. Distractions become less effective, their power to divert attention diminishing. The relationship no longer feels like a source of pressure, its demands fading into memory. Instead, it starts feeling like an absence, a void that cannot be filled. Questions begin appearing, questions that were easy to ignore before but now demand attention. What if things could have been different? What if they had tried harder? What if they had been more honest? What if they had stayed? What if they misunderstood the situation? What if they left too soon? What if they never find that same connection again? What if the loss is permanent? For many avoidants, these thoughts do not arrive during the first few days, or even the first few weeks. They arrive much later, when the silence has stretched long enough to reveal what was always there. That delay creates the illusion that they were unaffected, that the relationship meant nothing to them. In reality, the emotional impact was postponed, delayed by the protective mechanisms that keep them safe. Avoidants often process loss differently because they tend to disconnect from painful emotions before fully understanding them, creating distance before they can feel. They create distance first and reflection later, a pattern that reverses the typical order of grief. While this strategy can reduce immediate discomfort, providing a buffer against pain, it often causes unresolved feelings to remain active beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when they can no longer be ignored. As time passes, memories begin carrying a different emotional weight, their significance changing. Small moments become more meaningful, their value finally recognized. Conversations that once seemed ordinary become memorable, their importance revealed. Acts of kindness gain new significance, the generosity of the empath finally appreciated. The emotional value of the relationship becomes easier to recognize because the intensity of the relationship is no longer present, no longer obscuring the truth. This is one of the strange truths about human psychology, a truth that explains so much about loss and longing. People often understand the value of something more clearly when they are no longer experiencing it every day, when distance provides perspective. Distance changes perspective, revealing what was hidden. What once felt overwhelming may later feel precious, its significance finally clear. What once felt restrictive may later feel comforting, its safety now appreciated. This does not mean the avoidant suddenly becomes emotionally transformed, suddenly able to feel what they could not feel before. Human behavior is rarely that simple, rarely that neat. But it does mean the emotional reality becomes harder to avoid, harder to escape, harder to deny. Delayed grief often enters quietly, without warning, like a thief in the night. It may begin as curiosity, a desire to know what happened to the person they once loved, then become reflection, a willingness to examine the past, then become longing, a recognition of what was lost, then become regret, a painful awareness of what might have been. Regret is especially powerful because it is not focused on what happened, but on what might have happened, the possibilities that were never realized. The mind begins creating alternative versions of the past, alternative conversations, alternative outcomes, alternative lives. The avoidant starts wondering whether fear influenced decisions more than they realized, whether their choices were driven by anxiety rather than wisdom, whether distance solved problems or simply postponed them, pushing the reckoning into the future, whether protecting themselves came at a greater cost than expected, the price of safety higher than they imagined. At the same time, nostalgia often grows stronger, its pull becoming irresistible. Nostalgia is selective, showing us only what we want to see. It does not replay every problem, every conflict, every disappointment. It highlights emotional moments, the peaks of connection and joy. It brings attention to connection, comfort, laughter, understanding, and familiarity, the experiences that made the relationship meaningful. The avoidant may find themselves thinking about details they once overlooked, small moments that seemed insignificant at the time, the way conversations flowed naturally, without effort, the emotional support that was always available, always ready to receive them, the feeling of being understood, truly seen, the consistency of someone's presence, a steady anchor in a chaotic world. These memories begin creating emotional tension because they conflict with the belief that distance was the complete solution, the answer to all their problems. This is why many people are shocked when an avoidant suddenly reappears after a long period of silence, their return seeming to come from nowhere. From the outside, it seems unexpected, a sudden change of heart. From the inside, a long psychological process may have been unfolding for months, a journey that was invisible to everyone else. Emotional distance creates perspective, providing a new vantage point that was not available before. When a relationship is active, attention is often focused on problems, conflicts, responsibilities, and fears, the negative aspects that demand attention. Once the relationship is gone, the mind gains a different vantage point, a broader view that encompasses the whole picture. The entire experience can be viewed from a broader perspective, its meaning finally clear. The connection becomes easier to appreciate, its value finally recognized. Its strengths become easier to recognize, the qualities that made it special. Its absence becomes easier to feel, the void that was always there. For some avoidants, this creates a powerful internal conflict, a war between competing fears. The fear of intimacy that once encouraged distance begins competing with another fear, the fear of permanent loss. This fear can become surprisingly intense because intimacy creates vulnerability, but permanent loss creates finality. And many people discover that finality feels far more frightening than vulnerability, that the possibility of forever is scarier than the risk of closeness. As this realization grows, some avoidants decide to return, to reach out, to reconnect. They send a message, open communication, make contact. To many empaths, this moment feels like validation, proof that their love was real, that they mattered. It feels like proof that the avoidant finally understands, finally sees what they lost. Sometimes that assumption is correct, but not always, not as often as people hope. This is where an important distinction must be made, a distinction that determines the future of any reconciliation. Not every avoidant returns, and returning does not automatically mean growth, does not automatically mean they have changed. Many people confuse loneliness with transformation, assuming that missing someone means they have grown. They assume that regret automatically creates self-awareness, that the pain of loss is the same as the wisdom of understanding. They assume that emotional discomfort produces personal growth, that suffering itself is enough to change them. Unfortunately, that is not always true, not by a long shot. A person can miss a relationship without understanding why it failed, can long for what was lost without knowing what went wrong. A person can feel lonely without addressing unhealthy patterns, can feel the pain of isolation without recognizing their role in creating it. A person can return without becoming emotionally available, can reconnect while still protecting themselves from true intimacy. True growth requires more than longing, more than the ache of absence. It requires reflection, a willingness to examine the past honestly. It requires accountability, a recognition of one's own contributions to the problems. It requires the willingness to examine uncomfortable truths, to face the parts of themselves they would rather ignore. Without that process, old patterns often return, the same fears reappearing, the same misunderstandings repeating themselves, the same emotional cycles beginning again. This is why self-awareness matters far more than reconciliation itself, why understanding is more important than reunion. The real question is not whether someone comes back, whether they will eventually return to you. The real question is whether they return with a different level of understanding, with a new awareness that allows them to show up differently. Because no contact was never designed to force a reunion, to manipulate someone into returning. It was designed to create clarity, to reveal the truth that was always there. And eventually, that clarity reveals something both people must face, something that cannot be avoided. One of the biggest misunderstandings about no contact is the belief that it is a competition, a battle to be won. People talk about it as if someone wins and someone loses, as if the outcome determines who was right and who was wrong. As if the goal is to remain silent longer than the other person, to prove that you are stronger. As if emotional strength is measured by who breaks first, who can endure the silence longest. But that perspective misses the deeper purpose entirely, the true meaning of the silence. No contact is not a battle. It is exposure, an unveiling of truth. It exposes the emotional patterns that were hidden beneath daily interactions, the habits of relating that shaped the relationship. It exposes attachment wounds that influence behavior without being recognized, the deep fears that drive decisions. It exposes fears that shaped decisions, the anxieties that determined the course of the relationship. It exposes needs that were never communicated clearly, the longings that were never expressed. It exposes hopes that both individuals carried into the relationship, the dreams they never shared. The empath often discovers that their need for connection became tied to their sense of worth, that their value felt dependent on being wanted. They realize how much validation they were seeking through closeness, how their need for approval drove their behavior. They recognize how often they sacrificed their own needs to maintain harmony, how their own well-being was secondary to the peace of others. They begin seeing the difference between healthy love and emotional over-responsibility, recognizing that caring does not require self-destruction. The avoidant faces a different exposure, a different set of truths. They begin recognizing how often distance was used as protection, a shield against the vulnerability of intimacy. How frequently independence became a shield against vulnerability, a way to avoid the risks of closeness. How emotional withdrawal prevented deeper connection, keeping others at arm's length. How avoidance solved immediate discomfort while creating long-term loneliness, trading temporary peace for lasting isolation. Neither realization is easy, neither is comfortable. Both require honesty, a willingness to see themselves clearly. Both require courage, the strength to face what they have been avoiding. Because confronting emotional patterns means accepting responsibility for them, recognizing their role in the relationship's failure. And responsibility removes excuses, stripping away the justifications that once protected them. The empath can no longer blame every problem on another person's behavior, can no longer see themselves as the innocent victim. The avoidant can no longer blame every problem on emotional pressure, can no longer see themselves as the innocent party. Both are forced to look inward, to turn their attention to the source of their pain. Both are forced to examine themselves, to see the patterns that shaped their choices. Both are forced to confront the very things they spent years avoiding, the truths they buried long ago. The empath was often seeking safety through connection, hoping that closeness would provide protection. The avoidant was often seeking safety through distance, hoping that withdrawal would provide security. Different strategies, different behaviors, different personalities. Yet both were searching for the same thing, the same elusive goal. Protection, security, relief from emotional discomfort. The silence strips away those strategies, removing the tools they used to cope. It removes distractions, the constant activity that filled their days. It removes familiar routines, the structures that gave them comfort. It removes the ability to rely on old coping mechanisms, the crutches they used to stand. And eventually, both people come face to face with the emotional truths that existed long before the relationship began, truths that were buried beneath years of denial. Truths that can no longer be hidden behind constant communication, the flood of words that once masked the silence. Truths that can no longer be avoided through distance, the escape that once provided relief. Truths that demand attention, whether they are welcomed or not, insisting on being heard. The most important lesson in this entire journey is that silence affects everyone differently, that no two experiences are the same. But it changes no one by accident, leaving no one untouched. The empath feels the loss first, their heart breaking open. The avoidant often feels relief first, their shoulders relaxing. One faces the emotional storm immediately, the full force of the gale. The other may face it much later, a delayed reckoning that comes without warning. Yet, both are moving through a process that reveals truths they could not see while the relationship was still active, truths that were hidden by the movement of the relationship. Over time, suppressed emotions rise to the surface, demanding attention. Distance creates clarity, a new understanding of what happened. Old patterns become impossible to ignore, their repetition finally recognized. What once felt confusing starts making sense, the pieces falling into place. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable, the pain losing its power. And what once felt like an ending slowly becomes an opportunity for growth, a new beginning in disguise. The silence was never empty. Every quiet day carried a lesson, a truth waiting to be discovered. Every unanswered message revealed a truth, a fact that could no longer be denied. Every moment of distance exposed habits, fears, strengths, and weaknesses that had been hidden beneath the noise of the relationship, beneath the constant communication. When an avoidant and an empath both go no contact, the silence becomes a teacher, the strictest and most effective teacher there is. The empath learns they are not responsible for saving everyone, that the weight of the world is not theirs to carry. They learn that love should not require constant self-sacrifice, that true love is not a transaction. They learn that caring for others should never come at the cost of abandoning themselves, that self-love is not selfish. The avoidant learns that distance cannot solve every emotional problem, that running away is not the same as finding peace. They learn that emotions do not disappear simply because they are ignored, that buried feelings only grow stronger. They learn that true peace comes from understanding feelings, not escaping them, that facing fear is the only way to overcome it. One learns to let go, to release the need to control and fix. The other learns to feel, to embrace the emotions they once feared. And sometimes, by the time both understand these lessons, they are no longer the same people who entered the silence. They think differently, their minds transformed by the journey. They feel differently, their hearts opened by the pain. They see relationships differently, their vision cleared by the silence. That is why no contact is not really about losing someone. It is about discovering who you become when their voice is no longer guiding your choices, when you must find your own way. It is about finding your own direction, your own strength, your own identity, your own truth. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: the person you become after the silence matters far more than the person you lost during it. The transformation is the treasure. The growth is the gift. The understanding is the prize. If this video helped you understand the hidden psychology behind avoidance, empaths, and no contact, make sure to like this video and share it with someone who may need to hear this message today. And if you enjoy exploring psychology, emotional intelligence, human behavior, and relationship dynamics, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community. There are many more powerful insights waiting in the next video, and you will not want to miss them. Until next time, remember this: sometimes the loudest answers in life arrive through silence, speaking truths that words can never capture. And the silence, though it may feel like an ending, is often the beginning of understanding everything more clearly than ever before.